In this video, I actually wanted to show a subdivide toggle script that I wrote. Actually, there's two versions of it, so at the most basic level, I have created the script, and once I assign it to the hotkey, for me it's F5, I press it, you can see it's basically automatically put down a subdivide node, and if I press it again, it's basically going to toggle between the visibility, well, basically put down visibility flags on whether the subdivide node or the box. So if there's no subdivide under it, it's basically going to just create the subdivide node, and once it knows that it has a subdivide under the box or whatever node you have it, basically going to toggle between them like that. And that's pretty simple trick. And for the second version it is basically for me it's Control F5. It's basically it's going to put down a visibility flag on a subdivide, but actually the node actually is going to be selected as this one. So this is very common when you, let's say, want to see the actual subdivision result, but actually you want to change the geometry of the actual this low poly mesh. So, and also what's cool about this, you can actually just kind of move it around, and subdivide is actually not going to be moved around. Also, it's kind of in a weird position, but it's fine, not too distracting, and you can basically just go ahead and toggle between them like that. And there's many ways that we can expand on this script, but for the most basic ones, this is what I'm gonna leave you guys with, and let's take a look how it actually works. And if you want to customize it, let's take a look how can you do it. And now let's take a look at the actual script, and I'm gonna walk you through it, and let's take a look at it. So first of all, what we do is, and how can we maybe troubleshoot it. So if script doesn't really work for you, so the main part could be that the pane ID is wrong. So you could be have multiple panes opened up, and maybe you use the other pane and its ID is different. So whenever you have opened up another pane, maybe like in network editor, maybe like in here, it's basically got assigned an ID and it goes in order. So the oldest pane is going to always have 0 for it. So since this is my default pane, it has the ID of 0. So let's say I change my ID to the one applied. Let's say I want to, you see, it's not going to work. It's going to throw up an error. So it's basically the pane ID, if you run into problems, is probably the way you should look at the first of all. Maybe your pane ID is not right. So if you run into trouble with it, just change the pane IDs. So if this is the second pane, I mean, you could find it in the Python exactly which ID is which, but for the simplicity, I didn't really want to do it. So just play around with it and get your pane ID. But by default, it should be okay. It should be 0. If not, it should be 1, 2, 3, and so on. If you have very many panes opened, that is the network editor pane. So in here, since we have got an ID, we're basically getting the path of this one, and we know that we want to subdivide inside the geometry node. So since all our modeling is happening inside the geo nodes, we're basically getting the box type, and it is a geo type. So if you take a look at any of these, you can see there's a poly extrude SOP, and there's actually a name for it. So we get the box type, well, it's actually name, by this command, and we basically say if this path's node's type name is geo, this script is going to occur. So this is basically proofing us for let's say I wanted to run this script in here. You can see I press it, it doesn't even throw up any errors because the script is not actually happening. The script is basically not happening because our path is not a geo type name. Path type name is not a geo. So that's basically making sure that we actually can use a subdivide node because we are inside the geo node. So because in here we actually cannot use a geo node. so we cannot put down a subdivide node. So basically it's just a place where it's appropriate for us to create one. Let's go to the stub network and let's put down geo. Inside here, let's put down vox. Now you can see it still works because this path type is geo. And in geo nodes, we can actually create our subdivide networks. So that's that. So now we have made sure that we have geo. One thing we also make sure that we have not pinned down this network. So one thing to note that, so let's say we do some modeling and let's not follow the selection. So you can see this pin is basically saying following selection or not following. So let's say I've put in not following selection. Let's actually delete this. Let's go here. Let's say I put down not following. Let's go to delete and I start to extrude some of these. You can see it might look like nothing is changing, but you can see that even though visibility flag is on these, you can see there's a red circle, kind of a circle around this node. So now, since we are not following the selection, this is actually considered as a current node for this network, and current node is independent of the visibility flag or selection of this one, if we have not selected this not following selection. So basically this is making sure that we are following selection. You can see as soon as I press it, the current node is actually the same as its selected one. So that's basically make sure that, because if we do not put it, it's going to create many errors and it's hard to toggle between them. So basically these are just a bunch of making sure that setup is actually working. At the first line we are getting the current node. So the current node is basically any, so there cannot be not have a current node in this network. So you can see even though we have nothing selected, the current node is this one with the red border around it. So we get this node and we set it as a current one. So it is a little weird. So the current node, even though it's not selected, is this one. And if I press on script, you can see we don't even need to be select anything. It's going to, even if it's not selected, this is the current node. I'm going to put it around. So, but since our selection, let's say in here, makes it automatically, since we are not following the selection, automatically makes this as a current node. You can press on it and it's going to create or switch between the subdivides. So basically we get the current node and we set it as a current node. So setting the current node in this one is basically the make sure that it is selected, so you can actually use it as a, so I can actually show it you like that. So let's put this node and let's put it inside Python shell and let's say set current, and in this we have to yes or no, so we can say true or false, or we can just 0 or 1. Set current, you can see it's going to select this poly extrude, we can see, and let's do it again, but this time let's say we have selected this node. So let's press it again. So you can see it selects this one. It took out the red border around this one. And actually the red border was never there because, well, let's do it again. So red border, let's do it again. Set current, you can see the red border is now gone and this node now is selected. The only one is selected, this one. And basically red border is around this one, since this is now the current node. So this is basically how we get the node that we want to create from, that we check if there's a subdivide node or not. So yeah, and also the clear or selected is also very useful. So let's say we have these two selected and we reference this node and we say set current. Say yes. It's set. You can see we select it, but these three are all still selected. So this is why we use the clear or selected, which is basically going to make sure that we deselect everything and select only one node. So let's just copy it and copy clear or selected, which is basically yes or no, and by default it is no, but since you want to yes, so we add this. You can see now at the end of it we make sure that we have only one node selected, and from that in we are moving forward with it. So basically we make sure, and it's the variable is called current node. There's only one node in it. We reference it, and that's where we work together with it uh, on the bottom. So we create a string, which is basically subdivide, which we reference a couple of times since we do not have to write subdivide every time. We can just reference as sub, and by default we have subdivide node, which is basically the node that we create is at none, which is basically we assume that we do not have this node. And now let's just go through the script, what happens when we press on it first time and the second time, and why it toggles between them. So let's say we don't have any subdivide node and we just want to create subdivide for this our geometry. So we press on it. So what happens? So first of all, this first if statement asks if we have our output for this node is not equals 0. So if this has more outputs than 0, it's basically it has more than 0. Basically, if it has any outputs for it, this is going to run. But since we do not have it, this if statement at first does not happen. So basically just skips it and moves on. So now it basically depends on all of these three if and else statements for us to create our nodes and switch between them. So if the current node type is not a subdivide, so we know our current node type is actually the poly extrude. This is a poly extrude. So you can see that although even these are just names, but actual node is the poly extrude. So these are the actual things that Python sees, and we can always reference them like that. So we know that this is not a subdivide node, and also our subdivide node is equals none since this if statement did not run. So this is what happens. We press on it. Basically, it says to create an output node, which is a sub, and sub is basically subdivide. You can see here it's called a subdivide like that. It basically creates it, and then we create it and we reference it, and then we set it current. Basically, we basically select it, and then we also put down set a generic flag, which is basically the display flag. We put in a display flag. We basically select it and then put down a display flag on subdivide, and that's it. So this is the first time. So for the second time, when we run the script, a couple of things changes. First of all, since last time we pressed it, our subdivide is selected. So let's take a look at it. First of all, this if statement still does not run because our current node outputs are still at 0, and this runs only if there's not 0. So this still happens. So this still does not happen. So basically it's left for these two to take a look at it. If the current node type equals sub, so we know that our current node which is selected is actually subdivide node. So basically this statement is going to happen. And what it does, and we can actually, I'm going to show at the end of the video how can we actually improve this script with one simple line. So you can see it's kind of a, so let's say actually, let's demonstrate this. So let's say I select this subdivide and press on script. You can see it's going to create an error because first of all, even though we have this current node is equals sub and this one starts to run, it actually does not have an input 0 since it's not connected to anything. It does not have input 0, which is this, and it basically throws an error for it. So since this one has input 0, you can see if it's connected to 2, it's also going to throw an error. So this is actually for the creases. So this is fine for the, I have never used this crease. So basically it has to be a 0 because we are actually referencing sub the input 0. So let's take a look at it. So we create a variable which is current node, which current node is our subdivide, and we reference input 0, which is this input wire, like that. Basically we reference this node. We get this node and we set it as a current node. Basically we select it and we put down a visibility flag like that. So on the second one, so on the first one we get this one, and the second one rent this elif, and it basically selects our second input node, which is back to the poly extrude. So that's that. And now for the third time, to get back to it, what we have to do is press it again, and what happens now? So now this poly extrude is the current node, and we know that this length of the inputs is now actually not 0. So you can see this is not actually 0 because we have one output of this node. So this actually runs, this if statement actually runs. So in this if statement, it's pretty simple. So I'm going to show it actually inside here. So I'm going to just press it out and let's just put it output. You can see it basically references any node that it goes to as an output. And if we have two subdivide, let's do it again, you can see basically it's references both of these nodes. So whenever we have this one, it's basically going to run a loop and check if any of these outputs are actually subdivide outputs. So and we basically run a loop for n in current node outputs. So basically for every node, it looks for its type. So we know it's subdivide. And if it finds that this is actually subdivide node, it's basically going to create a variable, update our variable, which is now a none, to the n, which is basically this node. Basically going to reference the first subdivide node that it's going to find, which is whatever. So it could be, so for this it actually can be connected to the multiple ones. So it's probably the best one is with a split node. So let's say we have a split, and let's say we have maybe, I don't know, some boolean connected to this one, and we have subdivide connected to this one. Actually, it can be also this one. Let's say I press on script, you can see it's going to find the first subdivide node. So this can actually go to the whatever direction that we need. It's going to always find at least one subdivide if it has connected to it, if it is connected to it. And if it doesn't, so if we have only this one, you can see it's going to actually, like that, it's going to create a new one. But if we have at least one subdivide node connected to it, so it's going to find it and select it. So that's why we run this loop. So find it any subdivide node that is connected to this one, and it's going to update subdivide node as its node network. So, and the important is to break. So once it finds it, we break it. So break makes it basically exit this loop. So let's say if we have multiple subdivide nodes connected, it's going to basically connect to the first one. It's basically connect to the first one, because once it finds it, it's going to break it and exit the loop and move on. So the value will be set and we exit the loop. If we do not break, actually I'm going to copy it, delete it, apply it. You see that it's going to select the last node because it's still going to loop, and at the end of it, it's going to select the last subdivide node. So that's why we break. And yeah, that's it. So if it finds it, it puts it on the end node, and that's it, and it breaks. But if it doesn't find it, it's still at the subdivide node is at the done. So, and that's it. And that's why it's actually going to split switch. And once it's run this one, so which one did it run? So the last one did it run. So the last leave statement, if the current node is not a subdivide, which is right now, and the subdivide node is not and if we have a subdivide node, so basically if it is ran and updated, and if it's not none, this is going to run. So what we have to do is we reference our subdivide node that we got from this loop and put it as a current, just like in there, and select it as a visible, like that. And that's why it switches between it. And basically that's it for the basics of it. And for the second script that we are toggling between the wireframes, it's pretty simple. Basically, we are just playing around with the display and render flag. So let's take a look at it. So everything else is the same. Only thing that we have to look at is at the last if statement. So what we use are actually is generic flag set. So we can actually, for any node, we can actually check if it's actually now as a visible. Basically, if this display render is actually put down. So let's try it out. So let's put it this one, and let's copy this is current generic flag. You can see it's basically who.node flag. It basically asks if this node is now displayed. You can see it's false. But if we, let's say, reference box 1, we know it has a, actually let's put it now here, and let's put it again. You see now it's true, because we know that it's now it has a put in a display and render flag on it. So basically just use it as one of the conditions that has to be filled for us to put it as a put down a flags like that. So it's basically the same approach, only with the playing around with the render flags and display flags. So that's it. One thing I quickly wanted to add: for us to get this effect, we have to make sure that we have in display options, we have actually set up in markers as a display, as a current model geometry as a wireframe. So you can see that we have a display model, which is basically the whatever we have this display flag on it. So we change it like that. For me, it's basically a smooth shaded. But there's also option for the current model, which is basically the whatever we have selected inside our network. So for this toggle to work like that, make sure that you have current model geometry set to wireframe like that. And for the last thing, I said I wanted to show how can we improve our nodes. So first of all, let's go to the edit shelf for the first node. And one thing you will notice that if you run the script on a lonely subdivided node, you can see it's going to throw an error, because it goes to the elif statement where it's the current node is sub, which is now, and it tries to get the output, the input 0 of this node, and we obviously we don't have it, so that's why it throws an error. So what we can do is make sure that this only runs if there are input 0 added. So what we can do is actually use a very basic method for it. So use an AND, let's say current node dot, so we can use it as we can use input method, and in parentheses we have to specify the index, and for the index it's going to be 0 because it's the first point that you want to look at. We can do is exponential equals is not none, like now, which is when it's not none, it's going to run only when it's not none, like now. So let's apply it. Let's press on the script again. You can see nothing happens. But if you press on this one, you can see now it's still toggles between because it's not none. We can actually take a look at it, something like in here. So that input, and let's in parentheses 0, you can see it runs, but it doesn't return anything. So that's usually it's none. It doesn't display it, but it's none because it's nothing. So, but if we connect it to the 0 to the 1, run it again, you can see it's returned the box 1 like that. So now we have improved it, and it still works just as well. So that's it for this video, I think. Happy New Year, and I hope to make more videos for the next year. And I've just been very busy about the Python and don't feel like I have anything else to add, and maybe this is gonna help someone else. So, but I'm definitely still using Houdini, and I'm still loving it. So, and see you next time, hopefully, and bye.